What then should the United States do? Let me offer a few suggestions in closing. First, regarding the U.S. position in the South China Sea, we should recognize that where possible, a policy of clarity may be more stabilizing than a policy of ambiguity. I applaud Secretary Clinton for stating that rival claims in the South China Sea should be resolved through multilateral negotiations, and that we will seek to facilitate those negotiations. Most Asian states welcomed that statement. Ultimately, this is about China's relations with its neighbors, not China and the United States. Nonetheless, it is helpful for us to continue clarifying the U.S. position so other countries know where possible which claims the United States accepts, which ones we do not, and what actions we are prepared to support our policies and partners, especially in the Philippines, which is a treaty ally. Second, the United States should assist our ASEAN partners in resolving their own disputes in the South China Sea as a means of fostering greater ASEAN unity vis-a-vis China. China seeks to exploit the divisions among ASEAN members to play them off each other to press its own agenda. Resolving the competing maritime claims among ASEAN states, as Malaysia and Brunei have recently done, would enable our partners to establish a more united front. Third, the United States needs to help our ASEAN partners to build up their maritime defense and detection capabilities, to develop and deploy basic systems such as early warning radar and coastal security vessels. Remedying this lack of capacity and enhancing our joint exercises would provide for a more common operational picture in the South China Sea and a better ability to respond to threats. Fourth, the United States Senate needs to take a hard look at the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. I know this is unpopular among many conservatives. I've had doubts about it myself. But the fact is, successive administrations of both parties have adhered to the convention's basic structures and done so without a seat at the table. Meanwhile, states like China are working within the convention to advance fringe views that aim to deny access to international waters. This leaves the United States to rely on the good graces of foreign powers and its own superior force to ensure U.S. rights of navigation. But these conditions cannot be taken for granted, which is why the U.S. Navy strongly supports the convention and the added legal guarantees it offers to our naval operations. Thus, for national security reasons, the Senate needs to decide whether it is finally time to ratify the Law of the Sea Treaty. Fifth, we need to shift U.S. regional force posture to put greater emphasis on emerging areas of competition, especially the Indian Ocean and South China Sea. I've joined with my colleagues in the Armed Services Committee, Senators Carl Levin and Jim Webb, in calling for a timeout to reevaluate our basic plans in Japan and Guam. And I've done so not to withdraw America from Asia, but to enhance our commitment to regional security. It is not Congress's place to devise regional basing arrangements, but as new realities and cost overruns call our current plans into question, Congress must ask the hard questions. Our goal should be to move toward a more geographically dispersed force posture in the Asia-Pacific region, as Secretary Gates has described, and a centerpiece of that effort will always be our basing commitments with our historic allies, Japan and Korea. Finally, the United States must continue to make the necessary investments in our defense capabilities, especially naval forces, in order to remain the world's leading military power. We are now facing enormous domestic pressures to cut spending, including defense spending, and some reductions are certainly necessary. Reasonable people can disagree about how deep those cuts should be. But when the President pledged recently to cut $400 billion in defense spending over 12 years, with no strategic rationale for why this figure was chosen or what risks it would entail, and with the Secretary of Defense only being told about it the day beforehand, I think reasonable people could also agree that this is no way to plan for our national defense. We must be guided by strategy, not arbitrary arithmetic. The events now unfolding in the South China Sea will play a decisive role in shaping the development of the Asia-Pacific region in this century, and the United States must remain actively engaged in that process. In this regard, I am troubled by recent statements made by some of my colleagues in Congress and some of the Republican presidential candidates suggesting a desire to withdraw from the world and reduce our commitments abroad. America has made that mistake before, and we should learn from this history, not repeat it. After all, history shows us that Americans themselves are the greatest beneficiaries of the rules-based international order that is upheld by U.S. power and leadership. We abdicate that role at the world's peril and our own. If those of you who are visiting from the Asia-Pacific region only take one message back home with you, let it be this: there's always been an isolationist trend in the United States, but Americans have rejected it before, and I believe they will reject it again now. There will always be a solid base of support in America for a strong internationalist foreign policy. That isn't going anywhere, and neither is America. We will not withdraw or be pushed out of the Asia-Pacific region. We will stay engaged there, committed to our friends and allies, and together we will succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator McCain. Your remarks really capped the day off, and as if you were here all day long, actually. They were tremendous. Thank you very much. Let me open the floor for questions. As we have been working today, I just ask that you introduce yourself and your affiliation when you raise the question. Start here.
I'm Caitlin Antrim. I'm with the Rule of Law Committee for the Ocean. Senator McCain, I can't tell you how pleasing it is to hear you say good things about the Law of the Sea Convention. We're looking at this year as the chance to get it through, and I'd like to thank you for your comments and ask if you will take in advice not just from the Navy, which has been a strong supporter, the State Department, but also turn to American industry and environmental groups to get the full picture of why so many people support this convention.
Thank you, and let me say that for someone who has been in the Arctic, in fact, one of the more interesting experiences I ever had was going to Svalbard, Norway. There's no doubt that we have finally found the Northwest Passage, and that entails all kinds of challenges and new aspects of the law of the sea. I have to be very blunt with you. I'm going to have to make sure that we have conservative support if we bring it up, the law of the sea treaty up before the United States Senate. We really cannot afford to have it defeated. If it were defeated, then I don't think it would ever have another opportunity for many, many years. So I intend to spend the next few weeks, during the next few weeks, of going around to see my friends who inhabit think tanks that may not be quite as centrist as CSIS is, and try to get their thoughts and their ideas and their proposals. I think there's a growing awareness of this whole situation, and you mentioned environmentalists, that there is an aspect of global warming, or what is taking place in the melting, that argues for it. But the other argument, of course, is what we've been discussing, and that is freedom of navigation and exploitation in oceans around the world, including the South China Sea.
Thank you. Tiger Zhang from the Stimson Center. Just now you mentioned the U.S. should push forward for a multilateral negotiation, which is very different from the bottom line, I would say, that the China probably is considering, which is multilateral talk. So are you suggesting that the U.S. would or must play a part in that multilateral negotiation, either as a mediator or whatever? Thank you.
You know, I'd like to see the United States play a role of encouraging multilateral negotiations. Whether the United States can play a useful role by being actively engaged in it, frankly, is something that judgment that I would not want to make certainly at this time, because it would have to depend on the format, the venue, all of the things that go into a set of serious negotiations. I think the key element here is not so much what the U.S. does or not do, it's what the other nations do. It's whether Vietnam and the Philippines can reconcile their differences and present a common front. It's whether all of frankly, the nations in the region can negotiate with China with a common set of principles and goals. I know that's a blunt statement, but that's really what this has got to be all about, and where the United States can play a role in resolving those differences so that a united front can be prevented is where I think we can be most helpful.
Gentleman here in the middle.
Yes, Senator Bill Jones from Executive Intelligence Review. On a topic that's going to be before you, which doesn't have to do with your discussion tonight, the House has already introduced again restoring the Glass-Steagall Amendment. I know you talked about poverty in Burma. You realize the conditions in the United States are getting worse from day to day, and Glass-Steagall could be a help in dealing with this. I was wondering, are you going to support again to sponsor the amendment as it comes up in the Senate? Thank you.
Yes, I am and will continue to support it, but I also have to tell you that it's probably one of those that will pass the House and not have 60 votes in the Senate. That's just the reality, but I will certainly support it. I think it was one of the greatest mistakes made in recent history was the repeal of that very important piece of legislation. Thanks for the call. Thanks for the question.